I had this startup that I did the interview process with, and I got the job ultimately. I was like very excited about it. The day before I accepted this, I get an email from a recruiter at Facebook at the time saying, "Hey, we saw this project that you did in college," and I'm going to go back to that project. Um, we're interested. Also, this is 2 years after I graduated. We saw that you did this project in college. We have this role that we think would be a good fit for you that involves both like engineering and talking to clients. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I'm about to accept this other offer. So, so it pretty much was a fast. So like I responded to the email that day. I did the like screening interview that night, I'm pretty sure. And then I did the on-site interview. I think it was either the next day or the day after. So it was like a really accelerated process to go
A
through.
3-day process at
Yeah.
most. We're back with another episode of the Custom Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Baines. This show is all about spotlighting Black and Latino STEM professionals and helping you all have a successful career in STEM. If you haven't yet, please follow and subscribe on our YouTube channel. It's Custom Journeys. That's CUSTEM Journeys. I'm really excited about today's guest, Ishvarus Davis. I said that right, Ish?
You got it right.
All right, cool. That's what I'm talking about. So Ish has a background in computer science from the University of Pittsburg, and he's currently working as an engineering manager for Meta, also formerly known as Facebook. So really excited to learn about Ish's journey through tech, how he got to where he is today, and then hopefully you guys will take some advice and tips from this episode and have a successful career in tech. So man, Ish, my boy, I'm glad you hopped on here this afternoon. How you doing, man?
Yes, sir. I'm doing well. It's been a busy week this week, but we're good. We're here. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. You know, it's Friday. It's been a busy Friday as well, but I'm excited about getting to learn everything about you and how you got to where you're at today.
100%. I'm excited. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So, man, Ish, let's kick it off. We always kind of start with the end in mind. You're engineering manager at Meta. Tell us a little bit about what your job is currently and like what you do in your role now.
My job by trade is pretty much to be a leader. Funny enough, like you can be a leader in any role, but the manager's job is to lead and support their team. So I actually have a team of 6 now. We work on several different projects. The biggest one is on lead ads at Meta, which is under the ads platform. So some of the ads that you might see as you're scrolling Facebook or Instagram, our team may or may not be touching. So I have a team of both engineers and architects. Engineers are, of course, more focused on code. And we also are a team that talks directly to clients. So we get an understanding of verticals like financial services, tech and telco, determine how they're going. We also have architects that are going to be more focused on like driving adoption. So once we launch these shiny new projects, like how are people actually using them? Is the response rate what we want to see? How do we make sure that we're building the right things? So architects are super helpful there. Also, just in terms of like helping businesses be successful on Meta. So what you see when you see Facebook and Instagram is like the user experience, but advertisers are looking to see how do I make my business most effective on this platform. So pretty much that's what I'm here to help with.
All right, cool. No, I can relate to that. Starting this podcast journey, first thing you do is you start a Facebook, a IG, and a TikTok, right? So that's exactly what I did or what we did. And I threw about $100 at Instagram ads, just trying to see, hey, let me play around with it. And so it was pretty cool. Like you can kind of target people based on like demographic and age and location and all that good stuff. So it sounds like that's something that you guys are involved with.
100%. We actually just had a really big launch a couple of weeks ago for B2B on advertising, right? So if I'm a business and I want to target another business, examples of that might be, what's a consumer example? Like DoorDash wants to partner with a local restaurant. Like, how do they help that business? Like, that's a different user flow than I want someone to buy a T-shirt, right? Like
Yep.
different considerations, those kinds of things. So my team actually just launched audiences for that you can target with about 4 weeks ago now. Seeing a lot of really good success there, and we're going to keep pushing on that.
Okay, cool, man. Now I got to get you back on at another episode at some point to kind of break down ads. I mean, you can kind of give me some cheat codes on how to do this thing right, this advertising targeting. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch I can learn, so that's exciting. Because we talked earlier,
Yeah.
and I think we had some really strong similarities in terms of like how we got into this engineering, computer science track. So, kind of tell us like the origin story behind what motivated you or what inspired you to pursue software engineering or computer science in the first place.
Yes, a very interesting story. Atypical. Um, Actually, it began through just a serendipitous meeting at church. Funny enough, so my family went to church every Sunday, South Georgia. One Sunday we went, and there's this guy that like I could tell everyone loved. Everyone was going to talk to him, want to have a conversation. Like church is going on. He says like a couple of words to the church. I was like, who is this guy? Why do people like him so
Yeah.
much? So I was like talking to my mom sitting there, and she was like, he worked at IBM. He was an engineer at IBM. I was like, okay, like that sounds interesting. Of course, at that time, I had never met anyone that was like a software engineer. I don't think, or at least like it made sense to me. So I ended up talking to him, and he was like, yeah, I do software engineer at IBM. I was in California for a while, blah blah blah. So then at that time, I had to be maybe 16, 15 or
Mm.
16. I was like, I
Okay.
want to be a software engineer at IBM because that's what I saw. So that was like the goal for me. Really didn't have any like true engineering aspirations before that. And I guess it's the lesson on watching what you say, because that was the first job I had out of college, was becoming a software engineer at IBM. That was literally sparked at this serendipitous moment at church.
Yeah, man. They say they teach us in church there's power in the tongue. So I mean, you kind of spoke it into existence, and I think that's interesting and exciting at the same time that like these small interactions can have like such a big impact on people. Similar situation, like my dad had a family friend from church, and I found out he was an engineer, and he said, "Hey, come by the house. Let's talk about engineering, what your life could look like, how much money you can make." And once I started seeing that and that it was in demand, I was like, "Hey, I'm set. Like, let's do this. I guess I'm being an engineer from here on out." Prior to that, I was just like, "Yo, I'm being an NFL," even though I'm like 5'6". So I'm like
Man,
thankful. And that, what's the likelihood of me, going pro? But I mean, like, sometimes it just takes those small interactions where you get to meet somebody in passing, or you just kind of hear their story, and that can like spark something within them to just kind of encourage them to pursue something that they didn't even know about. So I think that's just powerful, like those interactions that you and I both had. So that's cool.
man, that's a whole other conversation to have in terms of like visibility. What you see, what you think you could be. I know so many people that are like, I want to be in the NBA or NFL. You can be an engineer, and over the long term, you will probably make more money. That's a whole other conversation. But like, these are opportunities that I think we just need to see more. Um,
Yeah.
which is a other conversation on like the people that made it here being more visible and kind of sharing their experience and making it seem like it's possible. I came from Waycross, Georgia. Like anybody can do it.
Definitely. So man, you randomly hear this guy, well respected in the community at your church. He says, "Hey, I'm an engineer at IBM." You're like, "Yo,
Yeah.
this is what I'm gonna do." And so you just randomly decide to go to University of Pittsburgh. Like, how do you decide to go from Georgia to Pittsburgh? Like, that's a huge difference, especially just
Yeah.
in temperature alone. So, like, what was that transition like, and why did you decide to make that move?
Man, that was another serendipitous kind of event in my life. So took the, I think it's called the PSAT, pre-SAT, did
Yeah.
pretty well, ended up taking the SAT. And there's the checkbox on the SAT where it says you can share the scores with different universities. So I checked that box off, did fairly well on the SAT. And one day, like literally before class, like my counselor comes up to me at my locker. She's like, this school called University of Pittsburgh is asking for your transcript. Um, can I send it to them? I literally like was at my locker. I'll never forget this. Like talking to my friends, I turned to her and say like, "Yeah, go for it." And I just turn around, like not thinking anything of it because I'm a high school kid talking to my friends. That's the most important thing at the time.
Yep.
So she goes and does that. Next thing you know, I get a letter. I think it was in like maybe 2 weeks or a month, saying like, "Hey, fill this out. We might have an opportunity for a full scholarship here for you." So I was like, interesting, very interesting. I was like, okay, let me fill this out. Filled it out, sent it, got accepted. So I didn't have to pay tuition. That out of state tuition was crazy, by the way. There was no way I was going to pay that. Um,
Yeah.
so Uh, got that opportunity. Had some other opportunities as well. But I mean, to be real on the situation, what happened at the time, I didn't even apply to colleges really. I guess a little bit more on the background of Waycross, Georgia. We did not have a lot of funds, to say the least. So I
It
was like, I
sounds
don't
like
have the
backwood Georgia. It sounds like it. So
so yeah, I was like, I don't have the money to be paying these application fees to all these universities. Like it's cost prohibitive, which is another thing to talk about. So I really wasn't applying to that many places. So mostly places around Georgia and places that were like, we'll waive the fee for the application. But ended up getting that scholarship from the University of Pittsburgh, a couple of other places in Georgia, and decided, hey, if I'm going to do it, why not go to a new place, try that out, and see what more of life is about. I really was in Waycross maybe 99% of my life to that point. So yeah, it
wow,
was different.
man, that's crazy that you've had like these just random moments where it's like things worked out, like God favor or whatever, like worked to your benefit. And so, like, did you end up having to pay like you didn't have to pay any tuition at all, or you just got in state versus out of state?
No tuition. I just had to pay
Man,
for
that's
housing.
crazy. Okay. All right. Nice, man. Well, I'm glad it worked out,
Yeah.
avoiding the student loan debt. So now you're not in that crisis that a lot of people are in. So I think that's great. Well, real quick, one follow up question. Like for the SAT, did you get like a perfect score? Or like you had like a 4.0 GPA? Like why? This is like unheard of to me. So like, what was
Oh,
it do you think that kind of helped you get like be so appealing to other universities and stuff?
that's a good point. The serendipity was matched by like this other stuff happening at the time. So
Okay.
I didn't get a perfect score on the SAT, but I did get like a pretty high percentile score. I think my high school GPA ended up being 4 point something, 4.3,
Like
something
a
like that.
5 point scale or something?
It was on a 4 point scale, but if you
Okay.
took AP classes, you could get
Like an
above a
extra.
4. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So I was getting good grades at the time. Actually, I totally forgot the most important part of this story. It's my mother, who was a preschool teacher's assistant at the time, and her whole thing was education. So like before I could do anything, play sports, go out, go outside, it's like no, you're getting these good grades
Sit
first,
your
and then
butt
you can
down and do this homework.
I'm, when I say nothing, I mean nothing. When my friends see this, they will laugh at this because they're like, Ish literally couldn't come outside. Um, but yeah, that was like what propelled me. So I think in terms of like the difference maker, I would say it was more her than like any natural skill or ability, just like making sure that I always kept education first. But anyway, with that being said, had good high school grades, did well on the SAT. So I think that's why a lot of colleges were interested.
Majoring in computer science at the University of Pittsburgh. It's not an
Yeah,
easy major. You're moving like almost across the country. How was your college experience overall?
man, that's a heck of a question. Uh, I would say my college experience was one of learning in two ways: one about myself, and of course, secondly about like my career.
Hmm.
On the career piece, it was mostly just like taking steps and always putting myself out there. So I think I had 6 internships in college, revolving around software engineering.
I
From
saw that on your LinkedIn profile. I was like, you was like in overdrive on these internships, bro. Like busy, but that's
man,
good.
yes, experience and money. I needed to make money too. So I went from like 10-person startups up to working from the university, working for the hospital system. All this random stuff that I did really helped to develop my skill set. So I learned a lot about industry in that way. Learning is about myself as well. So I think once you get to college, there's this idea that like it's this magical place where everything will be perfect. And then you get there and realize, oh, first of all, school is way harder than it was in high school.
Hmm.
Most cases. One, two, I was totally separated from my friend group. So like I didn't know a single person in Pittsburgh before moving to Pittsburgh. So like you're redeveloping this friend group. Three, you're figuring out who you are, right? How do you learn? I learned that in college for me, like if I'm in class, I can't listen and take notes. Like I can't do it. My brain doesn't work like
Mm.
that. So I'm like, if I'm listening, I'll listen and then after the class, I'll reflect, take notes. Way better scores that way. So Also, when you ask about the experience, I had the scholarship my freshman year, nearly lost the scholarship because of my GPA. And that wasn't only because of like learning how to work in college, just because it's a new environment, all that good
Yeah.
stuff. So I was like, okay, something has to change. And then I noticed like I'm learning differently than how I'm being taught. So I really like tailored the experience to how I learned best. And then after that, I think I averaged like a 3.95 or 3.9 for the rest of my college career after like a couple of little tweaks. So
Dang. Learning how you learn is so important because like throughout
yeah.
your entire life, like learning is a continuous process beyond just school. And you're going to learn so much more outside of school than in school that it's important that you understand like your learning style. So I think that that's really important that you did that. You mentioned that you had like 6 internships. Like how are you landing these joints? Were you just living in the career services office or you like expanded your network? What was going on where you were getting all these internships?
Man, it was a lot of talking and a lot of applications. So out of those six, I don't know how many I applied to. Probably was like 50 or something. So one was working through the school. So the school generally has opportunities, or like local businesses will go to the university and say, hey, we have 5 internships for our company. We're looking for 5 students in computer science that we want to work with. So I'm all over everything, like any opportunity. And that's another thread in life. Like, if anything, how I got here is like being opportunistic. Any opportunity that comes my way, I'm applying for that thing to see if it works out. So that's one. Two, making your resume stand out. So I worked with who was it? It was actually the counselor within the School of Computer Sciences that was like running these workshops, and no one was going. But I was like, I'm gonna go check these out. So it ended up being like a one-on-one session, right? Where it's like, here's what your resume should have, here's where to accentuate. You're working on side projects, make sure to do those side projects and like make it stand out, like what you're capable of. So that really helped. And I think just being a good interviewer, and that's a whole other conversation of like, what's your interview style as an interviewee, but like, what parts of yourself can you accentuate? So it was a lot of practice that went into that. So I could like go in and confidently talk about every single experience, what I'm learned, what I'm capable of, and what I hope to learn through this experience. So I think at that point, not many people were doing that in college. So like that gave me a big leg up.
Yeah, man, that's really smart. The people that I know that have been successful in internships, they did something very similar where like it wasn't just getting the grades, it was also like living in the career services office, not waiting until senior year to figure out what a resume is and like all that stuff. Career services like help so much with people like you and me, like landing jobs and internships. So that's powerful that you took advantage of it. One question I did have, man, you said once you figured out your learning style, you were like getting a 3.95 GPA. I forgot
Yeah.
to ask you, did you have prior experience with computer programming or was college your first introduction to it at all?
College was my first introduction. So I was like many of us on like MySpace back in the day, like playing around with the HTML and CSS, but that was really it. So when I got to
Okay.
college, it was, whoa, this is totally new. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, but once again, finding your strengths is really important there. So like, I wouldn't expect people to know that in college, but now I know like the harder, like my biggest strength is like, I'm gonna keep working on this problem until I figure it out. Like
Mm,
the determination there. So like that lends itself to computer science where of course you need to think strategically, but some stuff you just have to like keep hammering at until like, okay, I resolved this bug that it takes you a week to resolve. You
yeah.
have to just keep thinking through it. Um, so I think that's one piece of it is like knowing what you're willing to do and how you're willing to do it. But no, I did not have any experience in computer science really at all before university. So that
Okay.
first class was a struggle. And then subsequent classes, I was like, okay, I kind of get it, starting to get it. And like, okay, now it makes sense.
Okay. When you finished your computer science degree, like
Mhm.
what language did you feel like most confident in? Like what language did y'all probably learn the most in college? Like JavaScript, Java, what?
We learned Java. I learned a lot of languages through the internships though. So looking into things like Python, learned a lot of Kotlin, learned C sharp,
Okay.
used C++, plus plus, all that good stuff. So I would say the language capability I mostly got through internships because college was mostly Java. a little bit of Python. That's about it.
Interesting. All right. So one last follow up question, kind of along the same line. We see like a really big uptick in like boot camp enrollment. Apprenticeships are now a thing.
Yeah.
Udemy, Coursera, online certifications. Like, what do you feel like is the biggest advantage of going to college, or the biggest reason why somebody should consider going to college? Is it like technical skills you'll gain, soft skills, networking opportunities? What, in your opinion, what's the biggest reason why, or the biggest takeaway from your college experience?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of all those things wrapped into one, right? Like it's if I were to zoom out and think about computer science, and computer science is kind of interesting in this way, is that you could learn a lot of it without going to college. But once again, this is dependent on the person. So someone could be extremely skilled, and many of the people we look up to today in like the tech industry only went through like their freshman year, which is like not very common, but that does happen. You can learn a lot of it on your own, but once again, who are you? Are you motivated enough to learn this on your own? Do you have the like skills to teach yourself these kinds of things? I would say the benefit of college, as I think about it in general, is the mindset of learning and expanding your horizons. So like being good at computer science is great, but I learned so much about economics along the way, more about history, more about religion, all these things, like these different courses that I took. So you become more well rounded. And through that well roundedness, you learn that computer science in and of itself is interesting, but the most interesting piece is like applying it to different industries. So things like healthcare, financial services, even applying it to like the technology sector. These are the places where like that education really merges with the industries around us. So like having that broader perspective is really helpful. So if you just learn computer science and you can code, great. If you can know more about the industry, even better. If you develop like that entrepreneurial mindset, even better. So like these are things that you can get through the college experience more so than you might be able to get along. But I would say the other part of that is you can totally learn this stuff as well on your own. Like you're right, there's so much more available now in terms of like education on computer science specifically, um, that you can get there. But I would always recommend like that college experience because you learn more about yourself, you become more well-rounded, and you get different opportunities. So I'm sure we'll get into this later, but the way that I got my job at Meta actually went back to something I did in college specifically, that I worked on.
All right, leave it there. Leave it there. That's a good teaser. Because yeah, we're gonna talk about it now. Now we're gonna kind of like switch into our professional development segment where we kind of break
Yeah.
down the jobs that you've had, how you got those jobs, the amount of money you made, all that stuff. All right, let's start here, man. So you spoke it into existence, right? When the guy from your church came by, he said, "Hey, I'm an engineer, well respected in the community and things of that nature." And you said, "Hey, I'm gonna be an engineer at IBM."
Yeah.
Tell us how, and that's what actually turned out to happen for you. Like once you got graduated from University of Pittsburgh, tell us how you landed that job at IBM. Like, what was that process like? Was it somebody within your network? You just cold emailed somebody or applied online? Like, how did you land that job?
Yes. So once again, fortunes were in my favor. So I went to the Tapia conference, which is like a computer science conference for specifically for underrepresented communities
You
within the
said
field.
Tapia.
Yes, TAPIA.
Okay,
I
cool.
went to that. And once again, a lot of stuff was tied in here. Going back to being opportunistic, there was signups for people from our school to go to this conference, and they were picking one person. I don't know how many people applied. I don't think very many because I don't think people were really paying attention. I applied, got the scholarship, so I got to go to the conference for free. Once again, I would not have went to this. I did not have money to be paying for like flights and hotels and whatnot. So I got the scholarship, went to the conference, was just walking around. Um, this guy actually, I was walking by. He came up. He was like, um, "What year are you?" And I was like, "I'm a senior now." He's like, "What are you planning on doing after?" I was like, "Looking for jobs, really, but I'm not sure." He was like, "Come by and interview." So I got his number, email, all that good stuff. Met him 2 days later at the conference for the interview. It was not technical. It was like, "Who are you? What classes have you taken?"
Yeah.
All that stuff. Like, would you be a good fit at IBM? Apparently, did well there. So then he referred me to a hiring manager, and funny enough, California, where I wanted to be. So then she reached out and was like, "Here's how we're gonna do the hiring process," and it was virtual. So went through the hiring process and passed it. So then I got the job in Silicon Valley Labs in San Jose with IBM.
Nice, nice, nice. Man, I forgot to ask you, were your internships paid in college?
Yes, they were all paid.
Okay, like roughly how much, like hourly?
At the time, most of them were somewhere around like $15 an hour, something like that. Until I got
Okay,
to my later years, and then it got up closer to like 30.
okay, cool. All right, cool, man. So I think that's great that you mentioned that conference. Like, I think that's like for college students, I think that's one of the biggest ways that people can get jobs, especially like NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, whatever. Like if you can find a conference to go to, even if you're out of college, like that's like the perfect networking opportunity to hopefully land a job and get FaceTime with these like stakeholders. So I think that's great. So man, you land the job, Silicon Valley, um, dream job, dream location. How much were they paying like as a entry level software engineer?
They were paying about six figures. That's the range.
Okay.
But yeah, it was right about there.
All right, cool. Cool. All right,
um,
nice.
yeah.
All right.
So very close to that.
All right. Are there like any benefits? Cause I know like I hear some stories and I'm like, yo, I definitely chose the wrong field pursuing mechanical engineering. But like I hear some Googlers talking about like, yo, they gave me like 6-figure stock option bonus and all this other stuff. Like, are there any benefits to like working at IBM like outside of just a salary?
Uh, I would say at IBM, and maybe like you can learn this at other places, but I would say I learned how to work. So I get to this company. Of course, like being an intern and then being a full-time employee is quite different. That was my first learning. It's like I was like, oh, I've had a lot of internships. I can just walk in and do this, right? That was not right. You have to learn how to work with other people. There's higher expectations. It requires an understanding of the business. So that was what I would say was the biggest benefit of working at IBM. I also had a fantastic first manager. She was
Mm-hmm.
like so supportive. She was the one that hired me. She essentially was like, "Ish, I'm going to help you. Like, I believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to help you accelerate in any way that I can." So that was really helpful in a way, and it also wasn't like too much. I would say like I was overwhelmed for like the first 6 months, and then after that, it was like, okay, I get what I'm doing. It's not too crazy. I can do this because there was a time at the beginning where I was like, can I do this? Which is a reasonable
Mm,
question, right? Like in your first job in your career. But after a while, it's like, okay, I can do it. I know how to do it. I know what I'm doing, essentially.
okay. What do you think helped you get to that point? Just a repetition or like just getting into the swing of things? And what was it like technically different? Like were they asking you to code in a different language or what?
It wasn't technically different. I would say the technical piece was actually one of the easier pieces because it's like, as a new hire, pretty much, here's what we need to build, go build it. That's the fun part. I think the other things to learn were like how to work with people, being professional in every sense of the word. So like drafting out emails, like in a
Yeah.
professional way to get people aligned. Like I wasn't doing that in college or as an intern. Like how to do that there. Helping people to onboard. So I actually had an opportunity to help interns that were working with me to onboard. So like, how do you show up as a leader for them and help them out? So like, those were the things where I was like, I don't know if I can do this or how to do it. And eventually, you're right. Like, it's repetition, but always like staying in that zone where you're still learning and support system. I would say that's really important. Like my manager was like, "Trust me, you're doing fine." I think a lot of people tend to have like that perfectionist tendency, or like I want to be great at it immediately. But it's
Hmm.
like a growth mindset, right? Like you start, of course, you're not going to be great at it. If you are, then great, you found something that's like a natural talent. But if not, like you work toward it and you get good.
Nice. Yeah, and it sounds like your manager wasn't just your manager, also like a mentor, like really outlining the steps and helping you be successful, not just in your current position at the time, but even preparing you for like what's to come afterwards. When I look at like your track to going from entry level software engineer to now engineering manager at Meta, I was like, yo, this is a guy's on a fast track here. And it just my opinion outside looking in. But what do you think has been some of the things that you've kind of done throughout your career? And we'll talk about your job now at Meta in a minute, but what do you think you've kind of done throughout your career that's kind of helped set you apart and like help you move up the ladder at the pace you've been on?
That's a really good question. I would say one of the things for me is like really understanding yourself. So at each level you get to, you have to almost do an analysis on like what got you here. And some of the
Mm,
things that got you to where you are actually won't help you, or it could actually harm you at this next level. So like how do you build the other skills that you need to be successful? So like really focusing and paying attention on that. I would also just say like growth in yourself in different ways. So like a big thing for me was taking therapy. Shout out to everyone that was telling me like therapy is great, like you should do it. But
yeah.
um, I could say for sure that helped my career because now I can understand like how am I processing things? How do I actually feel? So much of work is how you feel. And that, like I
Mm,
see that even more as a manager now. Like outside of everything else, like the technical piece, the strategy piece, like how do people feel? Are they engaged? Are they happy? Do they feel respected? Do they feel cared for? Like so much of that matters. And I see that not from a manager perspective, but from like my own perspective as I was growing, like going to therapy helped me to determine like how do I feel about this? When is it time to leave IBM when I have that many managers? When is the time to switch into management? Like I was doing really
mm,
well as a VP, there's an opportunity here for management. Does it make sense for me? Um, so I would say that's the biggest thing is like once again just really knowing who you are. The other thing for me is like being opportunistic. And I mentioned that earlier, but like
mhm.
I'm always, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. I ask too many questions. And by ask too many questions, I mean like I'm consistently questioning everything in my life, both inside and outside of work. But through those questions, you learn, right? So like maybe something seemed obvious, but there's like a deeper reasoning behind it. Or maybe people are overlooking something and it's like here's an opportunity right in front of us, why are we not taking that? And they're like, oh, we didn't see it. And you're like, oh, wasn't that obvious? It's like constantly questioning, being curious. I would just say be curious as much as possible.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. I think like a lot of us that pursue these technical career fields are just thinking like, if I can be the best coder, or if I can be the best problem solver, or think the quickest in terms of how to adjust this or solve this problem, then I'll have like the most successful career, make the most money. But at the end of the day, everything is so human centered that it's like you
Yeah.
always have to have humans in mind. Like whether it's, hey, how do you communicate with your team better? How are you being empathetic to the customer at the end of the day? So you're building a good product for them. So I think it's really cool that you've kind of identified that as like something that's really been critical in this process of you like moving up the ladder and progressing your career. And it's like you said, I'm sure it served you well in your role like as a manager now because it's all you probably do. Because you said earlier everything is so team focused and making sure that your team has everything they need to be successful. You leave IBM, you land at Meta
Mhm.
as like a software engineer. I saw you became a senior software engineer. What's the biggest thing that's missing from people being a junior level to a senior level or mid level to a senior level software engineer? Is it like technical competency? What is it in your opinion?
Yeah, I would say I would think about this in different levels, right? It's like at the beginning of your career, focus on the tech. Like that's the foundation you have to understand. So like what does architecture look like? And you might not even need to do that at the beginning, but like, how does this system work that I'm working on? Learning different programming languages, being curious. So like, I would say at that point, just like if I was graduating in college right now, like I'm looking into blockchain, I'm looking into AR, VR, I'm looking into smart cars and how they work, like all these disparate things because you have like the time usually.
Yeah.
So I think about these things and understand like how do they kind of work? And the things that you really want to dive into, how does this really work? Because we can't do that with everything. So I would say that's a key piece kind of at the beginning of your career. It's just like that technical foundation. I would say like mid to senior levels. The mid level is you have that understanding at almost systems level. So we're working on this component. How does this work in a broader system? And how does this system work? And are we thinking about, as you get to a senior level, are we thinking about security? Are we thinking about efficiency? Is there another architecture that lends itself better to this problem than the one that we currently have, and really having that broader perspective? At that point, like that's the technical, like the major technical pieces. Like once you get to a senior engineer and perhaps staff, I would say staff is more focused on like deep knowledge in one area. So like I would look at my staff engineer if I have a project that I'm doing on AWS, and we have this really specific stack that we're using, and I need someone to understand that. I'm looking at a staff person to do that for the most part. But I would say like along with that, like the parallel path is the soft skills that we talked about. They're not really, I hate the phrase soft skills because they're just as important. So like you have to work on your one, like your communication. You're working on something. Can you communicate what you're working on to the team? And that's a
Yeah.
core thing. And like that gets lost sometimes, right? Like if you can't do that, you're really going to get throttled when you all of a sudden have to start presenting, here's what your team is doing to leadership. Like if you can't do that yourself, you're going to run into a problem. Are you listening to understand? Are you able to share things out and drive alignment? You can have the best ideas in the world. They should be data driven as much as possible. But along with that, can you communicate in a way to get people to buy in? One, are you bought in? Is your manager bought in? Are the people around you bought in that this needs to happen? If you can't do that, once again, you're going to get throttled in your career at some point. And the other big piece is, are you helping others on the team? So as like a senior level, you have to, like Meta has this concept of like 4 different ways of like management. And I find you do it as a senior engineer too. Like first of all, you manage yourself, then you manage through the team, you manage forward, like you're driving the
Mm.
vision, and you manage across, which means you have all these cross-functional partners. You're managing those relationships and driving it forward. So like as a senior engineer, you're not necessarily managing those pieces, but all those things have to be a part of what you do on a daily basis. It's like a core competency. So like you need to have all those skills, and you also need to be very technically sharp. So is there a new opportunity internally? Like most of our tools are internal. So like, is there something that someone else built across Meta that we can use? Can something we built tie into another platform that's being built? So like, there's so much going on. You have to have that broader vision and be able to distill that and bring it back to your team if something really matters, and then being able to drive that. And so these are things we all have to work on. And if you don't work on them, it's going to come back to bite you. That's another thing you learn in the industry. Like if you have a weak spot and you just like ignore it, or
Yeah.
you don't find a way to solve it, it's going to come back to bite you at some
It's
point.
gonna rear its
Always.
head. I got you.
Yeah.
And you know what? I got ahead of myself. Like I was so curious about like asking you about Meta that I didn't even ask you like how did you land the job at Meta first? Like when you decided to leave IBM, how did you even end up at Meta in the first place?
Once again, one of those moments. So I
You got a
was
lot of
actually,
these moments in your life, man. Like these
I,
opportunistic, right place, right time, but prepared for the
but
opportunity kind of moment.
yes, preparation, and then the opportunity just arises. So I decided, at the point in which I decided it's time for me to leave IBM, I was doing a lot of machine learning work at IBM. So I was like, okay, this is where I want to steer my career. I really like this field. Um, I did a course at Stanford, like the online machine learning course. Highly recommend. That was awesome. Uh, so I was like, okay, it's time. Started
Is it like by
interviewing.
Andrew Ng or something?
Yes, that's exactly it. It's
Okay, got
good.
you, got you.
Um, so yeah, took that. I was like, okay, it's time. Started interviewing with a lot of startups actually, and I had this startup that I did the interview process with, and I got the job ultimately. I was like very excited about it. I was going to be learning from other people that were like pretty well known in the industry, and they were like, "You're going to be learning directly from this person. This is a good opportunity." Um, but the day before I accepted this, I get an email from a recruiter at Facebook at the time saying, "Hey, we saw this project that you did in college," and I'm going to go back to that project. Um, we're interested. Also, this is 2 years after I graduated. We saw that you did this project in college. Um, we have this role that we think would be a good fit for you that involves both like engineering and talking to clients. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I'm about to accept this other offer. So, so it pretty much was a fast. So like I responded to the email that day. I did the like screening interview that night, I'm pretty sure. And then I did the on-site interview. I think it was either the next day or the day after. So it was like a really accelerated process to go
A
through.
3-day process at
Yeah.
most. Okay.
Um, so what was the project? The project that I worked on was like something I'd done with my friends, funny enough, called Forge in college, and it was built around like the idea of you have these different groups of people or communities on the
Mhm.
college campus, but it's difficult to like organically get together around an initiative. So like I'm gonna go to play basketball. How do I get 10 people to go like play basketball with? It's pretty difficult, right? You have your friend group, but it's just difficult to go beyond your friend group to do that. So one of the ideas that we were working on is how do we actually build this so that people across this college and ultimately others could do this. So ended up building out like an Android app for this, applying to a couple of competitions. I think we actually ranked in a few of them between Pitt, CMU, and a couple of like accelerators in the area. We actually did rank. So there was like
Nice.
some publicity, but not enough. And college was also difficult. So we were like, we don't have time to fully build this thing going into like junior and senior year of college. So just kind of left it there. Um, but that's the interesting part, right? That was probably 3 to 4 years before this meta recruiter reaches out and says, hey, I saw this thing that you worked on. I think you would be a good fit. So it was purely based off of this one random thing that I was doing sophomore year that I get this opportunity at Meta. If not for that, I would be at the other company right now, most likely.
So wait, that's crazy. Number one, how did they find this? Like, was it on GitHub? Was it like a press article about it? Like, that's like so random.
I have no idea how this recruiter. I was as surprised as you are right now when she said, "Hey, I saw you worked on this thing." I was like, "How did you know? Like, I worked on this. How did that compel you to reach out to me?"
Oh man,
Um,
you got to find this recruiter and ask him. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, man or woman, whoever it is. Like, you got to reach out, find them, and be like, "Yo, like, how did you find this?" Like, that's interesting, but
Yeah,
cool.
it's like the age of the. So we're like applying to competitions. There's still stuff online about it.
Yeah,
Coming across it 3 to 4 years later is interesting, but I think that speaks to the power of like once again just doing all these random little things that seem kind of random and might not yield, but I never would have known working on that project then. It was just like me and my friends doing it for fun. That would lead to like a career at Meta 4 years later. Like I never would know that, but that's how it turned out.
but can you kind of talk about like some of the opportunities that you've been afforded, or like the kind of lifestyle you're able to live pursuing this technical career track?
Yeah, I would say there's like two facets of this. One is like once again, Meta's like I don't know somewhere around 100,000 people.
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities. So like I've gotten a chance to speak at different panels, go to different conferences. So like I actually went to Tapia one year, like full circle as the recruiter for Meta,
Nice.
which is like different. Getting a chance to like just goes like universities talking there. I'm on my university's alumni board. I was one of the founding members of that. From like being working at Meta was a part of it. That's one piece, and I would say the other piece is, of course, you get compensated well. Like the skills you have to like deploy on a daily basis are quite high. Like I said, so like there are so many teams to work with. The engineering problems are like difficult, of course, as you can imagine. Like the amount of traffic that a Meta would get is insane. So you're working with so much data. So these kinds of things are pretty difficult. In terms of lifestyle, um, I'm probably like an okay person to ask about this. I don't do too much. I'm pretty simple. I'm gonna go travel. I think the biggest benefit of it is the stress that it takes away in that realm, right? Like if I want to plan a trip in 2 days, and I'm terrible at this. This is how I plan every trip. Like I decide it, and then like 2 days before, I plan a trip, but it's not stressful, right? Because you've been working and getting compensated well for what you do. So I would say travel is the biggest thing for me. Um, Also being able to help others. So going back and helping the family, all that good stuff. I've been afforded that opportunity through this.
All right. Nice, nice, nice. Sounds good. What are the skill sets like from a technical standpoint and from a soft skills standpoint that you typically look for when determining if somebody's a good fit for your team?
Yeah, quite a few things. So in terms of technical, I'm looking for curiosity. And that curiosity like manifests in different ways. So like what have you worked on in the past? How did you innovate? Like were you a key piece of that innovation? So you were working on something. I want to ask a lot of questions, diving deeper into that person's contributions, really trying to understand like how did you show up to drive this forward? Because one of the things that you tend to see is like the people that are going to get the furthest are the people that are willing to drive things um, that maybe not everyone is bought into, but that like everyone can agree upon is ultimately like going to be good. So if you don't have that ability to drive, it's going to be difficult to really be successful here. So you need that capability. I think on the other piece, it's how are you ramping up and what's like your technical level of what have you built? Like you work somewhere, most likely, like you have this full-time job, but like what are you building outside of that? That's fun, right? Like I'm looking for engineering to be a passion of yours and not just a profession. So even me today, I've worked on so many random things like automatic trading, crypto, like all of this like random stuff just because it's fun and we have that superpower to be able to build these things. So like how are you deploying that? I think the other technical piece is architecture. So if you have the system that you're going to design, like how would you design this? What kind of constraints are we thinking about? What kind of services and systems are we utilizing within this overall broader architecture that we're looking into? I think that's a really important skill to develop. And I'm looking for different levels of this, depending on the level that you are. So like, there's always like the generic question is like, if you were going to build like Twitter or if you were going to build Meta, like a key component of those, how would you do it? So looking to understand like, do you have that knowledge and awareness of like databases, caching, throttling, all of this stuff that goes into making a service resilient and make sense? Like, do you have that and have you shown it? And here's how we can develop it more here. So that's it on the technical side. I would say on the soft skill, I'm going to stop calling them soft skills. We have to call this on the skills that aren't like directly engineering related. One
Yeah.
thing I'm looking for is like people that have worked with clients. Really important, especially in my position, right? Because that's something that our team focuses on. So, have you worked with them, or do you have a passion to work with them? So, a lot of people haven't. When I got this job, I had not directly done that, um, but I had a passion to because I wanted to understand more. Like, I'm going to build these things. Why am I building this? And also, are we building the right thing? And I think that's where the curiosity comes in. So when you're talking to the people that will actually use this, you get to a much better understanding of why you're building something and you're not just building it. So I'm looking for that particular
Mm.
angle from people. Is like, do you want to understand the why and not just the what? That's one thing. Communication is the other thing. So, are you able to communicate across the rest of the team well? Are you a good team player? Can you communicate with me and help me understand what you're going through, where I can unblock, where I can help? Um, and you'll tend to find that like that communication piece is really difficult to actually work on in short periods of time. Like usually it takes like a lot of time, effort, commitment for someone to really grow that communication muscle. I would say probably more difficult than the technical piece from what I've seen. So looking for people that have that or are like very, very interested in developing that and deploying it in their day to day.
You hear about like programs like Leak Code, Carrot, things of that nature. Are there any like tools that people can use to kind of help prepare for the interview process? Like you said, hey, like there's probably some typical questions Meta may ask. Is there any typical questions that they can find like on other websites, or how do you think they should prepare best?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing I think for me is Practice, practice, practice. I get so many candidates that I don't know how far I can go into this, but like there in certain places there are more opportunities to practice than others. Like some universities, for instance, might have a course where you like actually prep for your career and you're doing interview prep and you're like getting your resume and all that good stuff ready. Other places do not have that. So if you're thinking about the job market, it might skew toward the people that have actually had a course that helped them prep for this, right?
Yep.
So like these are the kinds of things to look at. So one, the technical preparation. Um, Use the website of your choice, but make sure you're doing the medium questions, some of the hard questions, and really understanding the question you'll get in the interview might be like related, most likely not going to be the exact same question. But it doesn't need to be the exact same question, right? Like if you've been understanding how like the fundamentals of a linked list, a hash map, like how do these things fundamentally work? Like how does this like if I'm thinking about like tree traversals, what am I actually doing here and what can I do with it? Will help you solve most of the problems that you need to solve. You just need that lower level understanding of what's actually going on. Um, Also, I would say dive deep into at least one language. So, like, um, if I ask you, like, if I ask someone, they're in Java and they do like a sort function, like, how does Java default sort? Like, what kind of sorting algorithm is it? Quick sort, merge sort? Like, what are they using? If you say you've been using this language for 5 years and you claim to be an expert, like that's should be easy, right? Like, I know what kind of sort they
Gotcha.
like. These are the kinds of things that I would look into as well. And you don't have to do this with every language, but the one that you're going to be interviewing in, at the very least, know like how the data structures are actually used and how the memory might be allocated. This might be too much, but like these things can never hurt. So I remember in my interview at one point, we were talking about Java as it relates to Android. And once again, going back to that project that I did in college, I was like, okay, like I know that this, and this actually happens under the hood. And
Hmm.
that's super helpful because as the interviewer, you're like, okay, they actually know what they're doing. Like they're not just saying,
Gotcha.
like those are the things that I would say.
For people that are starting out and they're like, "Hey, I'm new to this. I'm just now starting my programming journey, software engineering journey." Is there a
Yeah.
particular software language, programming language you would recommend they start with?
I recommend Python always. I think that's the easiest one to like get up and running with and understand. The syntax is more human readable, I would say, to
Yeah.
understand. Um, and you can get up and running with Python like almost immediately. Other languages, not so much, depending, right? Like if you're working with C sharp, it's its own environment that you're trying to set up to really learn it well. Java, you're gonna run into like compilation issues for sure. Like I remember my first time working with Java, it was like 2 days of like, how the heck do I compile and run this thing? To be honest, so like with Python, it's much easier to
Yeah.
get up and running. And then from there, you learn the fundamentals and you can apply them to other places. But I would say just like use Python at first, get a good understanding, and then like broaden your horizons from there.
Um, Earlier we talked about like these different alternative ways to get into tech. Like you got college, like the pathway that you took, but like we talked about earlier, you have boot camps, apprenticeship programs, things of that nature. Like, what's kind of your perception of these alternative methods of learning programming? Like, is this something that's like being widely adopted, even at FANG companies, or is it still they want to see like the tried and true CS major graduated from top tier university, or are you starting to see people come in from boot camps and apprenticeship programs and things like that?
Man, that's a good question. I would say one thing is if you can prove that you're capable and you know what you're doing, like it doesn't matter where you just came from, to be
Gotcha.
honest. Like if you can look at like I think there's two pieces of it. One is sort of the historical, like anyone can come in and say they can do X, Y, and Z, but have you done anything like X, Y, and Z before? If not, it's going to be harder to believe. So that's one piece. I think what college does is help to prove that like I've taken this tried and true path and like I've done the algorithms course and I've done the data science course and the machine learning course and all that good stuff. So it's just like a mechanism of proof in a way. That's all a diploma is at the end of the day, like a mechanism of proof. Like, what is it
Mm,
actually like? I went through this process. You can, of course, prove that outside of that framework, just as you can do with anything, right? Like, well, most things. Like, if you want a driver's license, you have to take the driving test. But like most
yeah.
other things are, if you prove that you can do it in a way that's outside of like the typical mechanism, you still can. It might be a little bit more difficult, but it's still possible. I would say, especially with people that like you've already had a career already, like you're 10 or 15 years away, like into your career, and you're thinking, okay, I want to get into software engineering, maybe in my field, because I think I have this unique perspective that can help. How do I get those skills? Let me try boot camp. Like, of course, that's like a very reasonable thing to do, and you can develop those skills and bring them to the table. There's also a lot of other interesting opportunities around companies where you do like a rotation program.
Mhm.
You come in, you're still like pretty early level, and maybe you don't have a ton of industry experience, but there's a rotation that you can do to get you that exposure and that experience for you to be successful. So, um, my perspective on it is like, once again, going back to being opportunistic. I think if you put in the work, that opportunity will eventually come. There's no question, but you do have to put in the work.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, man, that reminds me of an answer, a similar statement that like a previous guest gave, where basically he said, I think it was Jeremy Gaston. He actually made an app similar to what you described, where like I think it was called U Ball, where like it was an app where like you can meet up with people in the neighborhood that were like at the gym, and you can just kind of like figure out a way to like get a basketball game going. But he kind of talked about how he landed a job at Capital One by not necessarily going to college, but by creating an app, a Capital One banking app, just for fun, like on his own. And then he used that on his portfolio to kind of prove, like you said, develop the proof that, hey, I know these skills. And that landed him a job at Capital One. So I think,
Yeah.
like you said, like if you prepare for the opportunity, and you keep putting the work out there, like eventually you'll be found. So I think that's great advice you just gave.
Yeah, and I think if we just zoom out and think about recruiters and sources, like the first source they'll typically get is your resume. The thing that they're looking for, like a resume is literally proof. Like
Yeah.
on your resume, what have you done that would
Yeah.
lend you to being a good candidate for this position? So that proof can come from anywhere. You just need to make sure you have good proof. That's all.
Hey, one quick question. I don't know if you know this. I didn't bring this up beforehand, but does Meta have like any programs like, for example, like Airbnb has like an apprenticeship program, Pinterest has an apprenticeship program, like some other company. I shouldn't even be giving these guys free advertising. Chase has like a program where like they're hiring like non-traditional employees. Like, do you know of any programs like that at Meta, or like I know this is like just thrown at you real quick, but do you know of any of those?
We do have programs. So like that theoretical rotation program I was talking about actually
Yeah.
exists at Meta.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
People can apply for that. So it's a really good opportunity. We also have internships that we have for people that like are early in their college career. I think it could be either freshmen or sophomores,
Gotcha.
to kind of accelerate that journey before. Because if you think about it, right, like the Meta internships or the Google internships, the Amazon internships are going to be like highly sought after. So you're going to kind of have like a certain amount of people are going to get those jobs, and it typically ends up being not a ton of people from our communities. So these opportunities are like earlier on in the college process where you can start to get ready for those like junior and senior year internships.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Hey man, we're at the time I told you I was gonna let you go. So I'm gonna ask you two quick questions. Well,
Sure.
one quick one and then one that is kind of up to you how long it takes you to answer. First
Yeah.
question, you mentioned like Web3, autonomous driving, cybersecurity, machine learning. If you had to pick one field for people to like focus on as like the future and like interesting topic, which one would you pick for people to kind of start learning and get educated on?
I would say, so I have two answers. I would say my first answer is look into these things at least at a surface level and see what resonates with you. Like, are there use cases that make sense? And for me, that tends to be it. Like, it's not just that Web3 will exist and it's like some really interesting technology that's going to drive this. Like, what's the use case
Mm-hmm.
behind it that I can like tap into? I think there's some, like, for me, there's really interesting opportunities for like communities to work together to take their funds and do interesting things with them. So like we can say there's a food desert somewhere. Can our community come together and we take away, like in this case, like on the blockchain, this trustless mechanism that we can come together and say like, let's make a grocery store here that we need. So like that's what excites me and gets me to like look deeper into things, but like find that thing for you. Um, but yeah, for me, it's Web3. That's my second answer.
All right, cool. I respect that. Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Second one. So you mentioned earlier that while after you left Pittsburgh, you went back and tried to not try it. You went back and started like an alumni association to help people from underrepresented groups have successful careers. And I
Mhm.
feel like from our previous discussions that helping others is like really important to you. So I want to get your big picture idea of how do we get more black men and women into tech. If you had a magic wand, if you can snap your fingers, win an infinity gauntlet, what would you do to get more black people in tech? What needs to be done to get more black people into tech?
I have like an hour long answer to this. Let's see how I can distill this. Here's what I think. I think as communities, right? Like we can think of our community as a community, like the Black community, Latinx community, all these different kinds of communities. I think we place bets if we think about the community in general. So I think a lot of the bets that we tend to place as a community, I know happened to me is like a lot of visibility goes to people in professional sports, entertainers, all this good stuff. And that tends to be what we see as success. But if we change that definition of what we see as success, I think we make different bets as a community. So, like, if we take my example, for instance, of my mom saying, like, you're literally not doing any of this stuff, like, focus on education. Like, how powerful would that be if that's the optimization rather than other things we might be optimizing for? Also, not to say that everyone wants to be or should be in tech. Like, I think it requires, like, uh, if it's a passion area for you and it makes sense, please do it. I think we just need more exposure. So, like, if you never take that first step, how do you know if you like it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get more people to that first step? So it's there's a lot. There's education. There's the structural barriers too. So it's not like we just decided one day that like our community is going to optimize for these things. A lot of this was structural in the way that it was set up, not only from the education system, but also to what kind of jobs were we able to get. We weren't always able to get jobs at companies like this. You know what I mean? So like all of these things kind of come together to like if we look at a funnel, right? There's a funnel where let's say we have a pool of 5 million people that could ultimately get into a tech role. How do we increase that funnel at every stage? So like one, are we educating at the earliest stages? Two, are we making sure, and this is really important, like people's needs are met. So before we get into talking about tech, like can you eat? Do you have a place to live? Like these kinds of things have to be taken care of. The other piece is, do we have opportunities to get into universities at the same rate? Do we have opportunities to get prepared for testing at the same rate? So like one of the things that was interesting for me, I'll talk to people here and they're like, yeah, I like had a tutor like helping me prep for the SAT. And I like took a class to help for the SAT. And I was like, what? Like we just rolled up one day and took the SAT. Like these kinds of things, like how do we keep enabling these at every stage of the funnel and make sure we're supporting ourselves, but we also, this is like that, and we need these structural barriers to be uplifted and removed wherever they are. So I think it's a responsibility for us that are in the industry to fight that fight because it is a fight. But on the other side, we also have to be empowering ourselves to move, not from just like, okay, there's one person from here who just happened to end up like in my case, once again, there was a lot of luck. I wouldn't necessarily call it luck, it was preparation as well, but like a lot of things had to go perfectly right.
Yeah.
How do we make it so that like it doesn't always have to be perfect? It's like this is the norm. Other people can go outside of this, do what they want to do in whatever area, but this is a normal path to take, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, this was like a special or exceptional situation. It does not have to be special or exceptional. If we look at other communities that are in tech, it's not exceptional for them to be there. It is the norm. So how do we make that the norm for us too?
Gotcha. Man, I gotta get you back on because I can tell that you're very intentional and that you put a lot of thought behind this. And I even want to hear like your deeper thoughts on how to remove these barriers. But yeah, everything you said is spot on, man. I think people like you that are doing the work from within these companies is really valuable and really important. And man, you hit me hard when you talked about like the tutoring. I used to work as a tutor. Like I took a brief like sabbatical and I did like some tutoring for a company, and I would see like parents from affluent neighborhoods writing $15,000 checks and $20,000 checks for their kids to spend 100 hours tutoring on the SAT. And I'm like, this is just completely different. So definitely, there's a lot of barriers in place, a lot of different opportunities that other communities have, or just kind of commonplace for their community that we're kind of behind the eight ball a little bit, or behind the system a little bit. So I look forward to like the work that we're doing to like change this, flip the script, and make it more level playing field for all of us. So, brother, I'm gonna leave it there unless you want to add something, but I'm gonna leave
No,
it there.
yeah, you're right. There's so much more to say, but like you hit the nail on the head. I think there's so much more to do. Um, and we'll do it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm excited. Brother Ish, man, I gotta let you go, man. You sticking around longer than what I told you were gonna do. But bro, I really appreciate you coming on and letting us know about your career journey, what you look for when determining if you're gonna hire somebody within a software engineering or architect role. Real quick, how can the people find you if they want to like follow you or keep up with you or reach out to you about a job, maybe? How can they find you?
LinkedIn, number one. Ishvarus Davis, just go and follow me there. I'm gonna be a lot more vocal. I think so. There will be more posts and everything coming from me. I think essentially one of the big things once we get in these positions is the visibility. So like a lot of us exist, but it's not very visible that we do exist. So I think it's on us as well to like just show up more in that way. So you'll be hearing more from me on LinkedIn and probably Medium, all this other stuff. Like LinkedIn will lead you to all the other stuff that I'm doing.
All right, cool. I'm looking forward to those Medium posts. I feel like it's gonna be some good blogs about, or some good posts about like diversifying tech. So I'm looking forward to that. Cool. Well, yeah, man. Thanks again, bro. I really, really appreciate it. You blessing us with your presence and breaking down all this knowledge and giving us the free game. For all of you guys, the audience, I appreciate you guys for sticking around, watching this episode. I really hope it provided you with some value and helped you have a successful career in STEM. I'm gonna let y'all go. Enjoy your week and tune back in next week for another episode of the Custom Journeys podcast. Peace.
Peace. Appreciate it.